Hello, everyone, and welcome to Craft Chat. My name is Titi Nguyen, and I'm the Director of Communications at Fuller Craft Museum. And this time, we have a guest, Francie Latour of We the People, a social justice project for kids, caregivers, and educators. She will discuss her project, Who Gets to Make History? The Story of Monuments and Statues. She'll also discuss her family action days. The image behind me is a very energetic portrait of kids making change. And it was part of the Sensation Day when We the People brought their program to Fuller Craft Museum. It was called Building Bridges, Not Walls. So I thought I'd share that photo with you. Good news, we are reopening the museum. Fuller Craft Museum will reopen to the public on Thursday, August 6th. We're very excited about that. We're looking forward to welcoming people back into our galleries. We will have a members preview day on Saturday, August 1st as well. But we're so excited to finally be back open again. So please come and join us on August 6th. Our format for today, and as usual with our craft chats, we will have Francie present her slides and do her talk. And if you have questions, we will take questions using the chat feature in Zoom. So you'll notice a little chat button at the bottom of your screen. And to the side of your screen, there's a chat box, and you can put your questions there. And after Francie's talk, we will have a Q&A, and we'll try to answer as many of those questions as possible. If you know someone who missed the craft chat, or if you'd like to view the craft chat again, we are recording it, and we will have it posted on our YouTube channel, along with our other craft chats. And you can view it there, and we'll have a link on our website. Lastly, if you enjoy our craft chats, our craft chat programming, our museum, please consider making a donation in any amount to Fuller Craft Museum in support of us. We appreciate that. If you look in the chat box right now, there is a link to our Donate Now page, and you can make a donation that way. So now I'd like to introduce our Director of Education, Sage Russo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to have everyone here today for this special presentation with We the People. As TT mentioned briefly, if you've been to one of our Sensation Days in the recent past, you might be familiar with We the People and their programming. And if you're not, I would love to pass the mic to Francie Latour, who can introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about We the People. Hi, Francie.
Hello, everybody. I'd ask you how you're all doing, but you're all muted. So you can tell me in the chat, though, and you can be honest. You don't have to say, I'm good, because these days, that might not be the case. We're all trying to keep it together, and I really appreciate you all being here. So I have a feeling that I am in a room with mostly grown-ups. If you are with a child, you can let us know in the chat. This is a little bit different than our workshops, A, because it's online, but also B, okay, so Imani is here with a child. It's a little bit different because I can see there are a lot of educators and community folks here. So I may not go through my presentation exactly as I would if I were delivering it for little kids. But I will try to mix it up if that's okay with you. And we'll see how it goes. Feel free to give me some feedback as we're, thank you, Inbal, as we're going along. So Yeah, We the People is a social justice project for kids, caregivers, and educators. We've been doing what we do since 2015. And we started pretty organically with social justice story times in libraries, and then expanded to museums and different cultural organizations, and then workshops for parent groups and schools. So we are all about supporting kids in helping them to notice and name the injustices that they already see in the world, that they already have a sense of. And also to support parents, caregivers, and educators in helping kids to connect their sort of hardwired sense of fairness, because kids know what's fair, to sort of broader issues of injustice in the world. And so I thought I would share a workshop that we're actually going to be doing for kids at the end of the month. We'll be doing this for the Cambridge Public Library. And it's our workshop called Who Gets to Make History? And it's about the story of monuments and statues. And as you can probably, if you're living in the world, and you know what's up, you probably know that there are a number of statues and monuments that are being dismantled, that are being defaced, that are becoming sites of protest around racial justice. So I will share my screen. Hopefully this works. Oh, hit share. It's probably a good idea.
Great.
Okay, can everybody see the screen?
We can.
Yes.
Awesome. So basically, we like to start where kids are. And so what does that mean? We want to know what they already know, because kids know a lot. I learn from kids all the time, my own, but also kids in workshops. And so, you know, kids have an idea when you ask, if you ask, like, what is a statue, right? What is a monument? We can talk about some things that they have in their own homes, on their own walls, in their own spaces, that they recognize as being things that are pretty important and have really special meaning and go in like a central visible place. And so statues and monuments are basically kind of like that, but much bigger, right? So they are things that we build in public places in a very special way that celebrate an important person or an event. And so we can take a look at what that means. So these are all, if you're with kids today, these are all monuments and statues that are in Boston that you can see. This is a statue of Harriet Tubman. You can know who Harriet Tubman is no matter what age you are. It's never too young to know who Harriet Tubman was. She was many, many things. She was an abolitionist, which means that she fought against slavery. So she fought for Black people to be free in this country because Black people were not free. And we still are not fully free. And so this statue celebrates Harriet by showing her in kind of like in action, right? So you kind of see that she looks like she's in action. And Harriet Tubman was often in action, right? So she was freeing enslaved Black people, making these very dangerous trips from the South to the North. And something's happening, okay. And you can see that here, right? So you can get kids to notice, they can see like, what's going on in that dress, right? And so statues and monuments don't have to literally look like the people that we are celebrating, but they have a lot of symbols, right? So signs that give us clues about how special they were and why. And so you can see in here a lot of different symbols. You see faces, you see footprints, you see tools. And so all of these things were, and shackles. And all of these things were really important in Harriet Tubman's life and important to why we celebrate her. Okay. Oop. Oh, Lord. Okay. I think you probably already know who this is. This is somebody that we celebrate a lot in this country. It's George Washington. We're going to revisit George in a little bit, but for now, we can take a look at this statue, which is right in Boston Common, in the public garden, actually. And we definitely know that he's special because he is way high up. He's in charge, right? So he's got this, he's on top of this horse, he's kind of looking out. And so this lets us know a little bit about why George Washington is so famous and such an important person in American history. He led the Revolutionary War, he became our first president, and there are lots of ways that we celebrate George Washington, including on our coins, as you can see here. Okay, last one in Boston that we'll take a look at is the, this is right in the Back Bay on Commonwealth Avenue, and it's the Women's Memorial. And so, oh, I wanna, can I actually see the chat? Is that possible? Oh, it's gonna be tough. So one thing that I usually ask kids is to notice what is different about Washington and these statues of these women here.
Francie, I can see the chat and put up any questions that you might want to address.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, what do folks notice about what's different? You could just shout it out and then, or put it in the chat, and then Sage, you can shout them out.
Sure.
So what is different about the Washington statue and these statues, this monument right here?
Several people have pointed out that they are lower and at the ground level.
Yep.
And someone else mentioned that they are more passively in poses, more passive, softer poses, thoughtful poses, leaning.
Yes. All true and all very important. Yeah, so that's telling us something right away. What else do you notice?
Someone mentioned they're looking at each other.
Yes, they are in relationship, right? So there's something, there's more than one. So no one woman is standing out the way Washington is. So Washington is sort of rendered like a big superhero, I guess is one way of putting it, on a very, very high horse. And these women are kind of connected, right? So you can imagine that if you took one of them away, it would kind of not make sense. And so you can see Phyllis Wheatley, who was an African-American poet and writer. She was born in Africa, actually, and she was enslaved here in Massachusetts. When some kids have heard about slavery when I do these presentations, and some have not, but those who have usually believe that enslaved people lived in the South. Like there was a big, big problem going on in the South with slavery. But Phillis Wheatley lived right here in our home state, and she was enslaved. And then we have Lucy Stone, who was pretty incredible. She was an abolitionist too, so she fought against slavery. She fought for women's right to vote. She actually fought for women's right to just wear comfortable skirts and pants. Because women used to have to wear these really tight, uncomfortable clothes that had all kinds of like horse hair and straw, like holding things together. And she wasn't feeling that at all. And so, yeah, she would wear these loose open skirts and bloomers, which you can kind of see here. And you can see very much that Lucy Stone and Phillis Wheatley are kind of in conversation in a way, almost as if they were speaking to each other. And so the statue tells us something about each of the women, but also that they had some very important connections in terms of what they were fighting for, even though they lived at different times. So, since we might have some kids, if you have a child, can you say in the chat how old they are? Because we're going to play a game.
You have a 10-year-old.
Okay.
And I think that might be the only young person present.
Okay. 10-year-old. Does the 10-year-old have a name? Let's hope.
Luca.
Luca. Luca, guess what? Everybody else, all the grown-ups, for once, don't get to do the fun thing. You get to do the fun thing and play this game called Guess the Monument. So I'm going to show you a close-up picture of a famous monument, and you have to tell me if you know what the monument is. And whatever parent or caregiver is with Luca right now, try not to cheat, although I know it's very tempting. Okay, are we ready?
Do you want Luca to turn on the microphone?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's okay with you, parent or caregiver?
Luca, you're on the line?
I think so. Oop. Looks like it.
Talk to us, Luca.
Unless you're shy.
Unless
audio's not working. Let's keep going.
Monty, here we go. Hold on. Let's see. Oh, it's on. Oh, maybe it's just not working.
oh,
Says it's
okay.
not working. Let's
So
keep
Luca,
going.
you can just put it in the chat. Here we go. What could this statue or monument be? If you have an idea, Luca, you can put it in the chat. What do you think? It is, well, something keeps going wrong with my thing. It's the Statue of Liberty, right? So this is a very famous statue in New York. And you can see it from lots of different places. It's hard to tell from this angle, but it's pretty big. And it's one of the most visited statues in our country. Okay, next one. These are really close up, so it might be hard to tell. So this is the Liberty Bell. So both of these, the Statue of Liberty and the Liberty Bell, have a lot to do with stories of freedom. Not freedom for everyone, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But first, here's the last guess your monument question? Any idea? Lucas? Okay. So this is Mount Rushmore. Which has also been in the news lately. Okay. This is a bonus one. It's really hard to get. Actually, grown-ups, if y'all know who this is or what this is, you can put it in the chat because this is a challenge. Anybody know?
There's a couple guesses, MLK or Brick House.
Who said Brick House?
Bridget.
Bridget. Fantastic. Yes. So this is a huge statue now in New York called Brick House by the sculptor Simone Lee. And kids really love seeing this because it looks so different than a lot of the statues that we look at. So Brick House is kind of watching over us, which I really like. And there's some things that we can notice about Brick House. This is a Black woman, so she has very, very clear African features in her lips, in her nose, and her hair, which is cornrowed. And her body also is celebrating Black culture and African traditions. Can anybody say in the chat if you know what this shape of her torso is celebrating? Anybody?
I think we stumped them.
Okay.
Oh.
So these are
last minute guesses.
These are some gorgeous and pretty complex in terms of their structure cuts in Cameroon. And the sculptor Simone Lee was very taken by these and also by the stereotype of huts. And so, you know, there are a lot of stereotypes around how Africans used to live, how Africans live now. And these stereotypes feed into this lie, this myth, this story of white superiority and Black inferiority. And so she wanted to take that and flip it and say, you know, I'm going to make this larger than life statue, and I'm going to celebrate the structure, the geometry, the beauty of these Cameroonian huts. Okay, so whose stories do monuments tell? Now, you know, in the adult world, in the grown-up world, we talk a lot about grown-up things. So like narratives of race and how narratives feed into racist systems. And a lot of parents and grown-ups sort of scratch their heads and they say, well, how can you get a kid to understand this? Like these narratives and how narratives are connected to monuments. And what we know is that kids know what it feels like when something big has happened, like a big conflict, and they have one version of the story, and their brother or sister has a very different version of that same story. This is my daily life as a parent, actually. So yeah, it's like, you know, Dad, my brother wouldn't let me watch TV. And then it's like, well, no, that's what it was. She told me she didn't want to watch TV. She wanted to go out and ride on her bike, and then she came back, and then she wanted to watch TV. So it's not fair to me. So thinking about whose stories do monuments tell is really a way of thinking about whose history are we showing and how are we showing it? Who's getting to tell their side of the story? Because they're getting to do it in a pretty big way, right? Because we know that monuments are kind of these larger than life structures. So we're back to George. George is looking pretty powerful and in command. And that's a side of the story you would tell if you wanted to celebrate Washington as one of our founding fathers. You can see even from far away how the entire space around Washington is laid out to make sure that we all see that he is the focus and that he's very important and heroic. And there are lots of sculptures of Washington, not only in Boston, but in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. And then, of course, there's this big thing that we all know called the Washington Monument. And there's another side of the story. So there is a woman who lived at the same time as George Washington. Her name was Ona Judge. And Ona was enslaved. She was forced into slavery under George and his wife Martha's Washington's control. So Ona actually was Martha Washington's personal slave. And so she made all of her dresses. She basically did everything that Martha Washington wanted her to do. We have this kind of poster here, this sign, because there are no real images of Martha Washington. But what we know is that the Washingtons owned many slaves, which means that they took Black people's freedom away. And the reason that I'm showing you Ona Judge in particular is that Ona Judge escaped. She escaped from George and Martha Washington. And so even though we don't have a picture of her, we do have a picture of the ads that ran in newspapers. So George and Martha Washington were really, really unhappy. They were furious, actually, that Ona Judge had the nerve to run away and escape slavery and seek her own freedom. And so they put this in the newspaper, hoping someone would find her, and they called her a runaway slave, and hoped that someone would bring her back. Ona Judge was hiding in New Hampshire. And although George Washington had a lot of important things to do, like found a new country and win the war and negotiate with the British on peace and all of these very, very, very important things, he still found the time and energy and dedication to keep going after Ona Judge for years. This is another advertisement that ran. And you can see here that there was a reward for capturing Ona Judge, and that reward was $10. So Ona Judge's side of the story, where it concerns George Washington, is looking really different already. And we can see that. George Washington, among many other things, had a lot of health problems in his life, particularly with his teeth. And so another thing we know about George Washington is that because he had all these problems with his teeth, he had fake sets of teeth that were made. And these are called dentures. And some of them are actually, you can actually see some of them at Mount Vernon, which is the house plantation where George and Martha lived. And these teeth were made with the teeth of enslaved people. So we know Ona Judge's name. We don't know the name of all of Martha and George Washington's slaves. But we know that some of them had their teeth pulled out to make these sets of fake teeth for George Washington. And so if you were one of those enslaved people, or the brother of one of them, or the sister of one, or the mother of one, or the daughter of one, or the son of one, you'd probably have a really different idea about George Washington. So yeah, so we start asking kids sort of like whose stories are missing from the monuments to George Washington that we usually see. And can we start thinking about those missing stories and those missing voices? Because they're important too. Another example, I'll just go over really quickly. This is another American hero. He was also an American president. This is Teddy Roosevelt. This is Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt is responsible for the creation of our national parks. And I've been to many of them, and they're beautiful, right? And they're a treasure for everyone in this country. And Theodore Roosevelt's story is also kind of complicated. So this statue that celebrates him is in front of the Museum of Natural History, I believe, in Manhattan, in New York. And it's been upsetting folks for a long time, but now people are starting to listen. And so you can see two people on either side of Theodore Roosevelt. And who would like to, in the chat, if you'd like, and Sage, you can call it out, what you're noticing about these two people.
They're lower than Roosevelt.
Yeah, they're lower than Roosevelt, which means what? What does that mean?
I'm also noticing they're both not white.
That's also true.
Great. So people are inputting that they are less valued or inferior to Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm. We can also notice that they are shirtless.
Oh,
yeah. And that they are not just lower than Roosevelt, but also kind of flanking him, right?
They also have sort of unhappy expressions on their faces.
Yes. And if you were, yes, they do have unhappy faces. That's exactly right. I'm glad you all noticed that. And so this is a statue that you can see really easily from the street in New York City. And it's in front of a building where millions and millions of school kids have gone to visit over the years. And so if you are Black or Native American or just not white, how do you think you're going to be feeling about this statue? What is the message that this statue is sending you?
Not important.
Yes. And if you're white, what kind of messages is it sending you?
Ooh, lots of things coming in. So yes, a lot of people echoing the feeling of being inferior, and that Roosevelt, the white man, has the power and he's more important.
Yeah. So one thing we can think about and that we ask kids to think about is, where do you think this statue belongs? So thinking about the stories that are, they're not missing, because there are stories of non-white people being told. But just like when you're arguing with your sister, she may tell a story that you think just is not the right story. And you have a right to share your story. And so the stories that are shared here are not stories that were told by Black Americans or by Native Americans. They're stories of Black identity and indigenous identity that are being told by white people. And so that's a problem.
I'm going to kind of translate some things that are in the comment, which I think are interesting, that although there is this Native American and this other Black person that's flanking the statue of Roosevelt, they're not identified, but Roosevelt is identified. And I think that just furthers your message, Francie, about whose story is being told. We don't even identify who these people are. So if they were important enough, we would actually have some sort of name or identifier that we could see there.
Yes, that's absolutely right. That's a great point. So usually at a certain point in our workshop, we will read a book called Milo's Museum, which I'm not going to read now because we don't have time. But I would encourage any of you, if you are grown up and you are in the life of a child, any child, regardless of their race, to find this book and read it. So in this book, Milo is wondering why she doesn't see herself or her culture in the museum. And she takes action. And the action that she takes is to make her own museum. And so there are lots of actions in the real world, like Milo, but in the real world that people have taken to change or to act when it comes to statues and monuments. So I think everybody knows what this is. We're back in Boston now. And so what does this statue represent? What are some of the things that come to mind when you see these little ducklings with the mama duck?
So we've got someone's naming it as Make Way for Ducklings, which we know, and other comments are it represents family, mothers, and children.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so an artist came along in the middle of the night and put cages around the ducklings and their mother. And so kids understand, and this is a very popular sculpture and very popular book, kids understand that families belong together. Mm-hmm. And they understand that mothers protect, mm-hmm. right? And so this is a way of, one way we can take action is by calling attention to the ways in which we are not doing, we're not living up to the values that we celebrate in our own sculptures and statues, right? And that's what this is pointing out. This is a very famous statue of Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee, how would I explain this to kids? Basically was the leader of the army that was fighting to hold on to slavery and hold on to this idea, this lie, that being white meant being treated better. And so this is a statue that has upset folks for a very long time. And so recently they decided to change the statue by projecting images onto it. And so you can see this is clearly about Black Lives Matter. And it's a picture of George Floyd. You can see another picture of it here. And so when people in power don't want you to tell your story, you can resist and you can take action. And you can take the very things that they use to tell their side of the story, to celebrate their story, and you can put your story on top of it. You know, I take your story and I'm laying my story on top of it because I don't believe your story. The last one I'll show you, which is my favorite. So this is also a person who was involved in the Confederacy in the South's fight in the Civil War to keep slavery. His name is J.E.B. Stuart. And as you can see, we've got the same thing going on with Washington and Robert E. Lee. So there's, you know, on a horse, high up, lots of power. And this is in Richmond, Virginia. And so a Black artist named Kehinde Wiley decided that he was going to challenge the celebration of this man who wanted to keep slavery. And he did it by making his own statue showing the very same values of power and command and celebration. So you can see it here at night. My computer is doing something very strange right now. Let's see what happens when I advance this. Yeah. Okay, that's not working. So you can see there are a lot of similarities, and I showed this close up because I wanted to know if anybody could see what this this Black hero is wearing on his feet. They're not military boots of any kind. Can anybody tell what they are?
Yeah, I've got people pointing out the Nikes.
They're Nikes, yeah, yeah. And we know that Kehinde Wiley was specifically answering or challenging the story that the South has often told, because when we look at them side by side, on the left is the statue of J.E.B. Stuart, the white leader who who fought to keep slavery. And on the right is Kehinde Wiley's statue. And so we can see that this was a direct way of answering, I'm gonna tell my side of the story. The time for you telling your side of the story is over. And we need to tell the stories that have been missing and told the wrong way for a really long time. And so we usually leave kids with this question of like, whose story will you celebrate, right? if you could make a statue, and you can make a statue, whose story would you want to celebrate? So that is who gets to make history. So I could stop right now, because I see there's about 10 minutes left, or I could quickly go through We Chalk the Walk in like 2 minutes.
I would say go ahead, go on through Chalk the Walk. We have a little tiny bit of time. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. Yeah, so We Chalk the Walk was a little bit of an accident. We have some partners, friends in Philadelphia who do a lot of similar programming that we do. They're called the Philly Children's Movement. They're awesome. And so they were planning a family day of action for Black lives following the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And so they asked if we wanted to get involved, and we said absolutely. And then we sort of gave it this name, We Chalk the Walk, which apparently took off because very unexpectedly, thousands of families all over the country ended up participating in this. So I think all told, there were like 38 states and the UK who ended up participating. People in big cities, this is Brooklyn, people in small towns, this is Oregon, I think. We also invited kids to do something other than chalking their walk, so they could mobilize their toys in a protest and learn what mobilization is all about. They could make signs. It was a really, really fun day. And I think it was an important day for a lot of families because it generated some uncomfortable but necessary conversations. So a lot of parents, when they submitted their photos, were reflecting on, I had no idea how to tell my kids what happened to George Floyd. Or, they would say, well, of course Black Lives Matter. Like, why would we be writing Black Lives Matter? Don't we know that they matter? But not everybody knows that they matter. And so, yeah, it was a really, really interesting day. We got a really big following, and then we turned that following into a family summer for Black lives. And so we have events planned for the end of the month, each month. So We Chalk the Walk was at the end of May. We just came off of this June action called To Minneapolis with Love. These were basically love letters to people in Minneapolis where George Floyd was killed. And we're going to have family actions at the end of this month and August as well. So that's that. I think I'm going to stop sharing. How can I do this?
Great.
Am I?
Yep.
Oh,
Perfect.
awesome.
That's great.
Really quick, Francie, can you tell us where the Harriet Tubman statue in Boston is located?
It's in the South End. It's in the South End on Tremont Street. I'm pretty sure it's on Tremont Street.
Great. Tita, do we have a few minutes for any additional questions in the chat?
We absolutely do. We absolutely do. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Francie, I have a question for you about parents. Do parents come to you and ask you for ways of describing things to their kids?
Yes, all the time. So I think that as we saw in the workshop, Who Gets to Make History, there's always a way to talk to kids in a way that's honest and direct. If you can start with something that they know. So one example would be systemic racism. So what is a system, right? So we know that kids can understand systems because they understand bicycles. So a bicycle is a system. And so we can show them a bicycle and all the different parts, and they very quickly can tell us that, you know, all the parts work together to do one thing. And that's a system. And so, you know, kids are very capable of understanding systemic racism if you explain it to them and if you tell them the truth. The truth that most kids come to us with is that racism is something that happens when someone's mean to someone because of their skin color. And so it's really important, you know, we have kids, we talk about like putting your binoculars on and getting really good at noticing all the different ways that racism shows up, because sometimes it's very, very hard to see. Just like when you see a bike moving, you might not be able to like see all of its parts. Yes, he is wearing a hoodie, whoever asked. The Black hero in Rumors of War, the Kehinde Wiley portrait. Do I have thoughts about how to talk with kids about George Floyd? So I have thoughts about how not to talk to kids about George Floyd, and how not to talk to kids about a lot of things that have to do with racism. So a lot of times we get caught up in this explanation of, you know, such and such happened to so-and-so because they're Black, right? So Ahmaud Arbery was killed because he was Black, or something happened to someone in the schoolyard because they're Black. One of the things that sort of starts to like put in kids' minds and cement in their way of thinking is that there's something basically wrong with being Black. So a lot of times when I go into a workshop with kids, and especially if it's like predominantly white kids, I will basically tell them like, you know, I identify myself as Black because, you know, we go around the room and identify our races if they know them. And then I say like, I love being Black. Like we don't have time today for me to tell you all the things that I love about being Black, you know, but I'll give you like my top 2, right? And so I think there's a lot of like unlearning, relearning, rewiring that needs to happen. And so one way that I explain racism to my kids, particularly when something happens, like an incident, is sort of like, you know, like why couldn't Rosa Parks sit where she wanted? Rosa Parks couldn't sit where she wanted because the most important thing to white people, the white people around her, was to hold on to the belief that they were better than her. That's why she couldn't sit where she wanted. Because white people had to hold on to this lie that they deserved better treatment.
That's brilliant.
And so these small changes are really, really important in like putting things in their proper piles where they belong.
That's awesome.
Somebody's asking about Milo's museum. Does the website have a bibliography for kids? If you're talking about the We the People website, no, we do not. We are trying to get resources up there. But I will say Milo's Museum is a book that we use. It's our go-to book for talking about racism. And the reason is that nobody's mean to Milo. And so we challenge the kids like, okay, so where was the racism? Like, I didn't see any, like nobody was mean. But they know something's wrong because she's in this museum and she feels really awful. And then we can start to talk about that. Oh yes, so somebody is mentioning the pairing of books and music on the website. So when we did We Chalk the Walk and to Minneapolis with love, I did something that we hadn't done before, which was I made a playlist. We've made playlists for events, but I made a playlist intentionally reflecting the themes of the action. And then I took some of the songs from the playlist and I paired them with children's books, so that there were multiple entry points for parents to talk with kids about certain things. So for example, there's a children's book called The Green Book, which introduces kids to this idea that Black people were not safe in the South, and had to be very careful about where they drove and where they stayed. And so this was kind of like a manual among Black people to be like, here's a safe place to stay, don't go to this restaurant, do not run out of gas in this town. And I paired it with a song by Jill Scott called Watching Me. And in the song, Jill Scott is talking about like the way in which our world is like, we're in surveillance mode all the time. But particularly Black people and Black bodies are kind of like policed. Like, you know, you're pulled over and you're like, what are you doing in this part of town? Where are you coming from? You're in a store and you're being followed. There's all kinds of ways that Black people are still not free to move, just freedom of movement and freedom from suspicion. And so pairing that song and that book was a good way to support parents in talking about this.
Awesome.
Francis,
yeah.
may I ask, what inspired you to launch into this work?
Oh, so I have 3 kids, so now they're 15, 12, and 11. But when they were little, I was having a really tough time figuring out how to talk with them about race. I didn't really, ironically, like a lot of white parents, I didn't really have a model for this because my parents are Haitian immigrants. And so we grew up with a very, very deep sense of pride around being Haitian. We learned all about the Haitian Revolution, which birthed the first Black republic in the Atlantic world. And so by the time I got to school, you know, when people would say things that were racist, I mean, I couldn't have said at that time that they're racist, but I knew that it was like their problem. It was not my problem. Something is wrong with you. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't have to be. And so, yeah, so I didn't really have like a good template for raising kids of color in America. And my kids are biracial. Their dad is white. And so, you know, we'd be reading a book about Martin Luther King. And then my son is like, so people who look like daddy killed people who look like mommy? And I'm like, oh, Lord Jesus. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this was really just wanting to find ways to break some of this stuff down for kids that didn't sort of leave them in this cloud of oppression. And then as my kids started to interact with other kids in a predominantly white school, I realized the consequences of white kids being kept in this bubble of complete ignorance around race and racism. That's basically how it started.
Wow. Thank you so much, Francie Latour. for not only for the work that you're doing, but also for coming to present to us today. We're basically at the end of our program here, and it's been a wonderful session. Thank you. Thank you, Sage Rousseau, for coordinating and making this happen and for having the people come to Fuller Craft Museum. Thank you.
It's been great. Thanks, Francie.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. I
Yes.
really appreciate it.
We do have another craft chat coming up on July 29th with Stephanie Cole. She's going to speak about her exhibition, Stephanie Cole Secular Cathedral. So you don't want to miss that. Again, that's July 29th at 2 p.m. But yeah, thank you so much, Francie. This has been enlightening, to say the least, and really appreciate your presence here.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me and being in community with you all.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
All right, goodbye, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Everybody.